Welcome to the FML Podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Sachdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone. In this episode of the FML Podcast, we're joined by Araminta Robertson, MD at Mint Studios.
Hey Shamir, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. I was about to say, hey Growth Gorilla, because your name is there, and I was like, no. Hey Shamir.
I might change it by default one day, you never know. Or at least get a number plate.
Someone will say it. You'll see.
Yeah.
It'll be funny.
So look, you and I obviously, we collaborated on one or two sort of projects. You're kind enough to have me on as a guest on Market Like a Fintech, which was amazing. But let's talk about you. Why don't you tell us about your journey so far with fintech?
I started in fintech in-house. I was working for a fintech company doing their content. I was at the time living in Barcelona, and it was a neobank for locals, for Spanish locals. Unfortunately, the company has since gone bust, but that was a really interesting experience. And after some time working there, I eventually realized I could do this freelance and have a bit more fun and also travel a bit. So after that, I moved to Malaysia and I was working as a freelancer there after a while. And then I moved back to the UK, where I am right now in Edinburgh, and eventually kind of became a content marketer. And since then, I've kind of grown my skills and also the clients that I work with. And now Mint Studios is a content marketing agency. We basically help fintech companies with customer acquisition via content marketing.
What does Mint do? How do you help fintechs?
Our tagline is we help fintech companies turn their blogs, turn their content into a customer acquisition channel, which basically means a lot of websites have blogs. A lot of fintech companies have blogs. How can we make the most of this blog? And how can we acquire customers with that blog? And I help fintech companies do that with SEO, with customer research, with writing content, with content promotion. We basically call ourselves like a full service content marketing agency, which means that we do everything from start to finish. Research, the writing, the publishing, the promotion, and then obviously conversion tracking and reporting.
Anyone who sort of visits your website, you explain sort of the theory sort of end to end there. And a lot of what you talk about is sort of bottom of the funnel content or content production. What's the theory behind what you do and how you help your clients turn their content into an acquisition channel?
Basically, what you're talking about is what I call the Mint Studios framework. There's kind of four main pillars of how do we actually turn a website blog into a customer acquisition channel. So the first thing we do is you can call it painpoint SEO, which basically means creating content that is really focused on customer pain points. So someone who has already established that they have a pain and is looking for a solution is a much better customer than someone who doesn't even know they have a problem yet. And that means that the whole thought process behind this is that let's target those who already have a problem and are already looking for a solution because they are ready to sign up right now. That's bottom of the funnel. Some people will start with awareness. They'll start with those who don't even know they have a problem yet. But we believe that it's better. It makes more sense to start with the low-hanging fruit, right? The people who are ready to convert right now. So that's what painpoint SEO is all about. It's like, let's create content that targets those people. And usually it's like comparison. So there's 5 kind of types of articles that are really good for bottom of the funnel. You'll have comparison. So Growth Gorilla versus another performance marketing agency. Alternatives to Growth Gorilla, Growth Gorilla pricing, what else? Like this type of article that is really specific. And use cases also. So I don't know if someone's like, I need performance marketing for fintech. That's a use case. So you want to rank for that. So that's kind of the first pillar, really focused type of content. The second pillar is content that is advanced. So basically, at Growth Gorilla, your target market is, fintech, head of marketing. So these are people who have an advanced level of knowledge, and writing sometimes really beginner level of content might not really impress them, and it might not really convert them either. And a lot of SEO content is that type of content, like 10 tips to improve your payment processing or stuff like that no CFO is going to read that and be like, this is great. We focus on creating content that is a lot more advanced. How do we do that? Well, first of all, our articles are based on interviews with subject matter experts within a company. So instead of me relying on my own knowledge of what payment processing should be about, I will actually sit down with the payment processing expert and kind of write the article based on their knowledge. I'm talking about like 1 hour in-depth interviews to really kind of extract the knowledge. And that's really important because then we can, our target market can really take us seriously. And the other benefit of doing this type of content is that we can include information about the product, we can include case studies, because it's all based on that interview. And that really helps. The third pillar is distribution, so promotion. A lot of people in the content marketing industry know how important it is to promote your content, your article, once you've published it. It's difficult to do, and most people just post on social media, which is not enough really anymore. So what we're doing is we're constantly experimenting and figuring out ways to help promote that content. At the moment, we do backlinks. We also work with content partners, and we're also actually exploring Facebook ads. And then final pillar is tracking and reporting. So, if you're investing a lot of money into content, it makes sense for you to want to see a return on your investment. And in order to do that, you need to track what's going on. A lot of people will say, okay, you cannot attribute leads to content. And sure, it's not an accurate science, but I do believe a bit is better than nothing. So we have like the analytics, the tag manager, all that set up so we can track, okay, here's how many conversions each article or each URL is bringing in. And this way we can know where to put our efforts in.
Pillar one, where you talk about sort of that low-hanging fruit. I mean, in reality, we do something really similar with pay. We call it picking up apples off the floor.
Really?
We're going for the higher intent audience, and then you kind of work your way out. So, brand terms, competitor terms, even then, we're doing things on social, it's problem solution type stuff, really just trying to get, the users with the highest intent first and get them through the front door. And why not? It's quicker and it costs less as well, right? So, that customer acquisition cost reduces significantly when you do that. So why should it be any different with content? One of the things that you've said is that content marketing is the art of attracting customers rather than chasing them.
Okay, so the reason why content marketing is the art or whatever of attracting is because content marketing is a way of attracting customers who are not brand aware, right? So we'll use Growth Gorilla again as an example. Someone needs a performance marketing fintech agency. They type in something like, how do I do performance marketing as a fintech company? They don't know Growth Gorilla exists yet. And yet, if you rank there on number one, and I think you do, or I think you're on the first page anyway, you are going to get that click. Yeah, you already have experienced this yourself, right? So you understand this, how powerful it is when you have people who don't even know that you exist yet. And then just by being aware of the problem or doing research, they're going to land on your website, they're going to land on your product. And because you meet that intent, they're going to sign up. So you just need to create the content, the right content. And this is where right is very important here, because you can also waste a lot of money in SEO and content and get it all wrong. So if you do it correctly, then you are ranking for exactly the right keywords, where someone is just researching on Google like we all do, we all Google. And then you turn up in the right places at the right time, and then you get a sign up. And so this is why people talk about SEO like it's getting customers while you sleep, because my SDRs, my sales reps are blog articles, because they're out there nonstop on my website. And whenever someone is researching something related to my product, they're going to start immediately signing up and will become a customer. So that's what's so powerful about content. And I was just here like talking about bottom of the funnel. Once you go up a bit, once you start educating customers as well, so not just getting the low-hanging fruit, but also educating them on what is performance marketing and stuff like that, then it's also very powerful, because then you're like becoming trustworthy in their eyes. So I'm not saying top of the funnel you should never do that. I'm just saying that start with bottom of the funnel and then work your way up. And top of the funnel is still very powerful, because you're also kind of educating them, and then you can later bring them on to becoming a customer. So that's what I mean by attracting.
And what advice would you give to a fintech struggling to attract rather than chase?
The first thing I would do is in-depth research on customer pain points. If you're struggling, first, are you creating content that is bottom of the funnel, right? Are you comparing your product to competitors? Are you writing about use cases, pain points, pricing, all those top 5 that I mentioned before? And if that's not the case, then that's the first thing that I would do. So in-depth research. There's a few questions. So me personally, what I do, or us, what we do when we start working with a client, is we talk to the sales team, we talk to the customer service team, we talk to the product team, and if possible to the customers. And we ask questions like, what was the challenge a recent prospect was trying to solve? What was the last prospect? One of my favorite questions is, what was the last prospect you had a really easy time closing? Because that means that they're like ready. What alternatives do people compare you to? What is your competitive advantage? And once you have those pain points, then you can start creating content that targets those. And as I mentioned before, there's like 5 that are really popular. That's a good place to start. And you'll start seeing results quicker than if you started with like something else.
I think the other thing to say here as well is, I think the thing with SEO particularly, there's a lot of talk around, because you talked about sort of researching the keywords and having the right content. There's always that sort of balance between, we can bring lots and lots and lots of traffic, but sometimes it's not necessarily a volume of traffic that's going to solve your problem and bring you customers. Actually targeting higher intent keywords that maybe bring in, say, a lower volume, but if they're hot to trot, then that's kind of what you want, right? So again, it kind of goes back to picking up those apples up off the floor. So to be clear, we're talking a lot about B2B here. What's sort of the key difference between sort of B2B content versus B2C content? Could these tactics work for a B2C audience?
Yeah, for sure. In my mind, I was not just talking about B2B. I think it's both B2B and B2C. The key thing I would say here is that B2B content marketing is even more valuable for B2B, because, you know, if you've got like the value of one customer is like 12K or something per month or something like that, like when it's very high value customers, a lead is even more valuable. If you get content right, then you're putting your brand, your website in front of the right eyes in a way that other channels can't. So when I work with clients that are B2B, often our job is a bit easier, because actually it's like, okay, we just need to do a lot of research and understand our customers really, really well, and then create content that's for them. Whereas with B2C, obviously, you have to get a lot more leads to be able to break even on your content marketing costs. You have to be strategic a bit. Okay, so if we're trying to get more customers, then what kind of content would work better? So both works really well for both. Both need education in the fintech space, like open banking is a really good example of a topic that requires a lot of education in the B2B space. And then in the B2C, like we don't learn about finance in schools, so everyone's Googling everything.
Yeah.
And this is what I talk a lot about this on my website, but basically there's such a huge opportunity here for fintech companies to educate people, because no one learns about how to get a mortgage, how to invest in stocks, how to pay off your pension. So I would say even maybe in B2C, there's even more of an opportunity, because there's just this lack of education, and fintech companies can kind of plug that and educate that. Obviously by being careful and following like FCA regulations and all that. You know, TikTok influencers are a bit not so sure about that.
I think with the B2C side, it's always that balance between they need the velocity at the beginning to bring in users, whereas the SEO piece always takes that little bit longer. But I think the Series A, Series B players are, you know, they're right primed to start. I think, in fact, if anything, my personal advice would be, as soon as you've got your Series A, start investing in content, start thinking about SEO as part of the wider strategy.
So I know, for example, a fintech company, they're bootstrapping. So they're not even raising. And they got most of their customers via content.
Okay, fair enough.
I would just say that in some cases, it makes sense to start with content right from the beginning. And then maybe in other cases where, like, for example, I know B2B fintech companies where they would get most of their customers via trade shows. Although it's really interesting now, because now with COVID, obviously, trade shows are not so big. And actually, we've had people come to us because it's like trade shows don't work anymore. So we're looking to digital marketing. I don't think it's a Series A or when you've raised your funding kind of thing. It's more like, what is your capacity?
If you've got a big target to hit, customer-wise, it's going to take time for obviously the content to get ranked by Google. So how do you manage that? Do you combine that with paid activity, try and sort of meet those search terms with a paid ad and then drive paid users into those content pieces, or a bit of both?
That's a really good question. So really, and yeah, you're right, it does take a while, and that's why content is an investment, right? And you're not going to see, it depends a little bit on your stage. If your website is a few years old, then, you know, you'll see results more quickly. But if it's a brand new website, then of course, yeah, it's going to take a while. That's also a good argument for starting immediately, because it is going to take a while, so might as well start early. And yeah, if you're hitting targets, then at the beginning, I would say, yeah, don't rely on content to hit those targets like on month 1, month 2. However, I do say that, and then once again, there have been cases of the opposite. That's why it's worth educating yourself a little bit on, you know, paid and on search and kind of evaluating what works best. The one thing I will say is, in our experience, content works best when you really understand your customers really well. Because then you know what triggers them, to go to Google and do some research. For customer acquisition purposes, if we're talking about retention and other, then that's a different case. But If you understand your customers inside out and you've got some subject matter experts on your team, so some really like people who know a lot about the industry, then that's a gold mine. Then that's like, yeah, go for it. If you're like still testing the grounds and you're not really sure which customers you should target, then yeah, you're right. Maybe it's worth doing some more testing and making sure that you've got your target market in mind and then going full on.
One of my biggest regrets was when I was sort of client side, I probably didn't invest enough into SEO in the early days. If I'd invested into that probably a year or two earlier, I think the impact 3 or 4 years later would have been arguably maybe 20 or 30% more in terms of customer acquisition. I still look back at that as a bit of an own goal. We had the budget for it as well, but I drove a lot of that into paid. On balance, it's a massively important channel in my view. The other thing that we can look at in terms of sort of perhaps not quite missed opportunities, but certainly not standing out, is probably tone of voice. So, I mean, what's your view for fintechs who kind of want to cut through the noise, stand out, be different?
Are you saying that a tone of voice will help you stand out?
Potentially. Does it?
I think people put too much energy into tone of voice because I don't think readers are reading for the tone of voice. They're reading for the content. I also have thoughts on thought leadership also, for example. Like, in order to be a thought leader, you need to actually have something to say. You need to have unique thoughts. And so with tone of voice, it's kind of similar in the sense that tone of voice is incredibly hard to replicate. It's very unique to a person. So unless, you've got one person on your team who has a really unique tone of voice and is really good at writing and is happy to do all the writing, then yeah, sure, go ahead. But if you're going to work with a team, if you're going to work with like a content agency, and then you send them like a tone of voice document and expect them to write exactly the same way, it's not possible. Tone of voice is it's like your accent, I would say. And people expect, the writer to be able to write exactly in that tone of voice. And it's just, tone of voice is too linked to personality, I would say. So focus on the content, the tone of voice, unless you've got a really like distinguished, if you've got like a fintech celebrity, like a Chris Skinner or a Ron Shevlin on your team, then yeah, of course, you want to keep that tone of voice. But if you don't, then focus on the content.
So I talked a lot about sort of production of content. We keep referring back to Google as a way for people to find that content, but Google's not the only way for people to read and consume the content that you're creating. Can you just sort of talk to me a little bit about distribution channels, the approach that fintechs can take, and perhaps the obvious ones that they might be missing?
It's where your audience hangs out. That's the first place I would look at. If it's B2B, then you want to look at LinkedIn. If it's B2C, then perhaps Facebook and Google. The first thing you want to look at is where's your audience hanging out, and then start with that channel. The other good piece of advice I've been given is like, get really good at one social media platform and then move on to the other one. If you're not really sure which channel, I think testing a few and then, going full on the one that is working best for you is a good way of approaching.
You said earlier on that you've got some thoughts around thought leadership. I want to hear those thoughts. So sure. I think they're going to be opinionated, but I'm curious as to what they might be.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's opinionated. It's just, when I was a freelance writer, a lot of people hired me to write thought leadership. If that thought leadership was me interviewing an actual thought leader and writing, then that's great. That's really great. That's what we want. But too many people hired me to write thought leadership and I had to come up with it. And this is not thought leadership, because thought leadership is when you actually have something different to say, something that's worth listening to, something that's worth writing about. You have an opinion on something. And so usually this person is going to be an expert or a specialist. So thought leadership is good if you've got someone on your team who is an expert and a specialist. But if you don't have that kind of person on the team, then to me, it doesn't really make sense to create thought leadership.
Let's switch streams a little bit and let's talk about Market Like a Fintech, the Fintech Marketing Hub. Remind me, when did you launch your podcast, Market Like a Fintech?
About a year ago.
How many guests have you had on to date now?
I'd have to check, but I'm thinking between 20 and 30. And we're taking a break now. We might start again. Depends on a few things.
What was the motivation behind the podcast, setting up the Slack channel? By the way, for anyone who hasn't joined the Slack channel, absolutely worth doing. We'll pop it in the show notes. But yeah, what was the motivation behind that?
I was a podcaster before. I had a podcast before and it was a lot of fun. And there's just not many resources in the fintech marketing space. And there's a lot of really clever and interesting people in the fintech marketing space. So our thought process with this podcast was, let's give them a voice. Let's talk about this topic that is not really talked about. And let's get some really interesting people on. And I don't think we thought more than that, honestly. So yeah, but it was great. It was we managed to meet so many interesting people and have so many fascinating discussions. We've had good feedback and people who really enjoyed them, the episodes. We're thinking of pivoting little, actually, for the next season to focus more on bootstrapped fintech companies, because we've noticed that these are the companies that are listening to the podcast the most because they're looking for ideas. And it's also people who are most willing to, talk about numbers and what's working and what isn't, because, bootstrapping is incredibly difficult, especially as a fintech company. So we're considering pivoting, but we'll see.
Cool. I mean, when you say pivoting, would it be a permanent thing, or would it be a season on bootstrap fintechs?
Good point. It could be a seasonal thing, actually. That's actually a good idea. This is kind of one of my blocks. I was like, I don't really want to pivot away from fintech marketing, but you're right. Maybe I could do it just one season and test it out. That's a good idea. Thanks.
There you go. That's what I'm here for. Full of them. Have you found running the community, running the Slack channel? I personally think it's great, by the way.
It's so much fun. Everyone thinks it's a lot of work. It's not at all. I just do a roundup every Monday, just so everyone kind of knows what's going on. It's growing really quickly and the discussions are really great. People are so incredibly kind and generous, like including you, Shamir. Like, thanks for sharing your knowledge with everyone in the group whenever they ask about ads and performance marketing. The reason we started it is because I'm in a few communities myself and I just know already like how powerful they are and how useful they are. And once again, there's very few fintech marketing resources. So me and Annie, my friend / kind of partner in this entire fintech marketing world, we're like, why not? Let's set this up and see what happens. And we set it up in September 2021. And, it's February now. And we've got like over 300 members and people say it's useful. So we're going to continue.
Like you said, I mean, I go on there and I answer questions, but I absolutely love going on there and reading the answers to questions that people have. It's a great learning resource. I think it's really, really helpful. I've got a few of my team members on it as well, because I think it's just useful for them to absorb information.
There's just not a lot of resources on fintech marketing. And you've got like fintech founders who I recently had a call with one who's in our group. And he was just like, where do I even get started with marketing? Like, I'm a developer. I don't know anything about marketing. And I'm also a founder and I'm trying to grow this company. Where do I even start? And the good thing is this community is a good place to start. And it's not just for fintech founders, for anyone. We've literally got everything under the sun, like from fintech founders to heads of marketing, everything, content writers, copywriters, every kind of person who just is passionate about fintech and marketing. So yeah, it's a really just fun place to congregate and meet other like-minded fintech marketing professionals.
Cool. You could say it's an ideal place for fintech marketers and leaders. I'm just saying.
What, the FML also?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
But no, yeah, I agree. It's a really useful resource. What sort of future plans for Mint? The podcast you've kind of mentioned, the community, Fintech Marketing Hub. What does the next few years look like for?
Wow.
You've got quite a bit going on. I've just realised actually you've got quite a few things. So yeah.
So Mint Studio is an agency now. I used to be a freelance content marketer. And the main reason that I decided to set up this agency is because really to move the needle for fintech companies to actually make content useful for them, I realized I needed a team, really. I needed resources. And also, I mean, content marketing is not cheap. If you're doing it in-house, it'll cost upwards of $10,000 a month. And the good thing is with an agency, I can have all the resources, all the skills, do everything from start to finish for half the price of that. So it's kind of a good way, obviously, if you're bootstrapping and that's still obviously going to be quite an investment, but it's still, for some fintech companies, it makes a lot more sense to work with an agency than hire someone full time. And the space is getting a lot more competitive. There's a lot of bad SEO content out there. There's a lot of bad content. And so just creating SEO articles is not enough anymore to stand out. A lot more fintech companies are waking up to are realizing that content is a big part of their marketing mix and they want content to play a big part of their marketing. But they're realizing there's just hiring a freelance writer and doing SEO content, SEO articles is just not enough, right? You need to go to the next level. So if you want to stand out now, you want to be creating a lot more in-depth articles. How do you do that? Well, once again, what I said before, start by figuring out what your customers really want to read. So do a lot of research. Start with that. Don't start with, and this is not what companies do, but this is what some content marketing agencies do, which is, what are the keywords that my competitors are ranking for? Sorting them by high volume and then creating, yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
You're not going to stand out that way because everyone else is doing that. So now if you really want to stand out content-wise, you dig deep to understand kind of what is it that our target market wants to read, and also what are they searching on Google, and then create content that is really like in-depth, that is high quality, that's got images, that is easy to read. That's kind of my thought process, and kind of with my marketing agency, this is what we're helping fintech companies do, create that type of content.
What's the future of Fintech Marketing Hub, the Slack community, and for Araminta?
Fintech Marketing Hub, Annie really, that is Annie's thing. So you'd have to ask her that. But in terms of the Slack community and what we're working on together with Annie, keep growing the community. And I think what we want is to be like the place for fintech marketers, really. Like a safe and welcoming place for all people who work at the intersection of fintech and marketing, who just want to meet other people, talk about fintech, talk about marketing, no spam, no promo. That's it. I mean, there's no big ambition. Maybe one day create an event. That would be cool. I mean, fintech is growing, every year so quickly. So who knows? I think we're also open to opportunities, and in 1 year, maybe something else would happen, but I think it's just really too soon to tell. And kind of the same goes for me, for Mint Studios. At the moment, what we want is just to help more fintech companies create really high quality content that actually moves the needle, that actually generates leads and customers, and just perfect that process. And maybe eventually help other fintech companies without having to take them on as an agency. So I'm not sure how yet, but I'm putting out resources on the blog. I'm putting out a newsletter, got a few LinkedIn posts here and there, and Twitter. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Brilliant. We'll close up with our quick fire round.
Oh wow! Cool.
Yet to be done quickly, so we'll soon find out. Not very fintech at all. So, what song do you have on repeat right now?
I'd have to open up my Spotify. I listen to techno, so they don't really. Yeah.
Oh wow! Okay,
yeah.
that changed my entire opinion of you. If you want the truth. Techno.
Okay, not techno. It's like minimal. It's like chill. It's like chill techno.
You've said techno now. It doesn't matter.
So they all have like strange names, and they all have like strange DJ names. So I never remember the names.
All right, we'll leave it as just techno in that case then for that one. What fintech app are you using the most at the moment?
Starting. Every day.
Every day, yeah.
Great app. Love them.
Cool. What are you binging on TV at the moment?
I'm trying to stay away. I'm trying to stay away from Netflix. So I'm not really binging. I'm reading books, so you can ask me about books if you want.
What book are you reading at the moment in that case?
I'm reading a really, really good book that I highly recommend called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And then I'm reading another one called The Upside of Stress, Why Stress is Sometimes Good. It's actually quite interesting. Turns out stress is not always bad. So,
what's the best bit of life advice you've ever received?
The answer to most things is exploration, which means just test a lot of different things. I'm a big fan of testing before jumping in. And I like taking risks, but I like also decreasing the downside as much as possible. I've lived in a lot of different cities, so I'd be like, okay, I'm going to live here for like a month first, see if I like it. Or I'm going to try writing about this before, saying that I want to write about it. In that way, it's just like slow and steady instead of like jumping right in.
If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be? Although you're pretty young as it is, so...
Keep reading a lot of books. That's the right thing to do.
Cool. Who in the world of fintech would you like to take to lunch?
The good thing is with the podcast, I managed to speak to some really, really interesting, fascinating people. And I really enjoyed the podcast with Benjamin from Nala. They're based in Tanzania. What he's doing is he's changing lives in Tanzania and in other places. I think it's really impressive what he's done so far. So I'd love to chat to him more. But he's very busy. So I know that won't happen. But
fair enough. So just to reiterate, Benjamin, you're far too busy for Araminta. What a...
Well, I mean...
We'll tag him in this, don't worry.
No, please don't.
Cool. And then last but not least, what's one thing I haven't asked that you felt that I should have?
Well, I liked one of your questions on the script, which was, I kind of actually already answered it, which was like, what are the most restrictive aspects of doing content? But I had another question, which was any examples of bottom of the funnel that produced spectacular results, and I had a really good example for you. So
cool. Well, when you said about the restrictions of content, of content marketing, and then tell me about your amazing example.
Well, I kind of briefly answered it before, but there's two really, I think, and that is, if you don't have a subject matter expert within your company, then that can restrict a little bit, because then you're like, okay, we want to be experts on this, but maybe we're not actually experts on this. And this happens more times than you might think, because it's often tech people who are building a fintech company and they might not know a lot about finance. And I think that can be a bit of a restriction. And then the other thing is budget, because as I mentioned before, content marketing, it's, if you're doing it in-house, it's like $10,000 a month. That's a lot. And even with an agency, maybe if you're bootstrapping, for example, that's too much. So that's like the two main restrictions, I would say.
And tell me about this amazing example.
I mean, amazing. It was just, I thought it was a really good example. But basically, Money Dashboard, I think is a good example because also some people know about Money Dashboard. They're a personal finance management app in the UK. And Yolt, a competitor of theirs, was closing down their B2C app. And they came to me and said, we want to take advantage of this opportunity. How can we do that? And like, what kind of content should we create? And we decided to create like an article that says, Yolt is closing down, because obviously Yolt customers are a really good customer for Money Dashboard because they're similar. It's a competitor. And so we created the first article, which was Yolt is closing down. What are your options? And it was a really like objective. Well, we try to make it as objective as possible and basically saying, Money Dashboard is a really good alternative. And you can read the article to see it yourself. If you put in Money Dashboard versus Yolt in Google, it's ranking there. And then to further capitalize on this event, we also created a Yolt versus Money Dashboard versus Emma, which is a typical bottom of the funnel content article because we're comparing competitors and stuff. And like both articles ranked between 24 hours of publishing them. And I don't have access to their conversions because they're not working with us as an agency, but their growth marketer basically told me that after 24 hours, they were getting 3 times the usual conversions they were getting thanks to these articles. And I was like, that's a perfect example of the power of bottom of the funnel content and also timing. And also you'd say strategic thinking, because they were very like, okay, let's capitalize on this. So I thought it was a good example.
Brilliant. Araminta, thank you very much for coming on today. We talked about a lot of stuff. We'll put links to Mint in the show notes and to the Fintech Marketing Hub and to the Slack channel. I think that's on the website as well. And anything else that I remember and promised throughout the episode.
Great. Thanks, Shamir. It's been a pleasure.
The FML Podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.